After 10 years of marriage, I found a love letter my wife wrote to another man crying, she said. I never thought you'd find out. I replied calmly. That's why I hired a private investigator. She screamed. You can't do this to me. I handed her the evidence and said, Tell him I took everything. She collapsed as I walked out. I never thought my marriage would end like this. 10 years. A whole decade of my life dedicated to one woman, only to find out that I was nothing more than a placeholder. A convenient option. I never thought she was capable of this. I never thought I would be the kind of man who hired a private investigator, who sat in his car at night questioning everything, who stared at evidence of betrayal laid out in front of him like a twisted puzzle where every piece made me sick. It started with a love letter. I was cleaning out the storage closet when I found an old shoebox. At first I thought it was one of those memory boxes, maybe some keepsakes from our early days, love notes, old ticket stubs, something sentimental. Something that would remind me of how much we loved each other. Instead, I pulled out a folded-up piece of paper, slightly yellowed at the edges. The first few words made my stomach turn. I love you more than I ever thought possible. It wasn't from me. It wasn't to me. I read the rest in a kind of frozen horror. Every word burned into my mind like a hot iron. You make me feel alive in a way I never did before. I dream about you every night. Even these stolen moments are enough. And at the bottom, in her handwriting, was her name. Sarah. My wife. The air left my lungs. I felt my hands shake as I read it again, hoping, praying, I had misunderstood. That there was some explanation. But there wasn't. I knew what this was. A love letter. A confession. Proof that the woman I shared my bed with, the woman I planned a future with, had been sneaking around with another man. My first instinct was denial. Maybe this was old. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was a mistake. But my gut told me otherwise. I sat on the floor for a long time, just staring at the paper, my mind racing through every moment of the last few years. The late nights. The sudden need for privacy with her phone. The way she had started pulling away from me, piece by piece, like a slow unraveling thread I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I needed answers. Instead of confronting her, I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator. Mark was an older guy, rough around the edges, the kind of man who had seen it all. He didn't ask many questions, just nodded as I handed him the letter and told him I needed to know everything. The waiting was torture. Every day, I went to work pretending everything was fine. I sat across from Sarah at the dinner table, watching her laugh, watching her kiss me goodnight, watching her move around our home like everything was normal. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. Then Mark called me. You're gonna want to sit down for this, he said. I barely heard the rest. There wasn't just one guy. There were two. Maybe more. The first one, David, was an old coworker. They had been seeing each other on and off for the last couple of years. He traveled for work, and whenever he was in town, she would meet him at a hotel. The second one, Ethan, was worse. Because I knew him. He was a neighbor. Someone I invited over for barbecues. Someone I shared drinks with. Someone who shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and laughed at my jokes while he was fucking my wife behind my back. Mark had photos. Screenshots of messages. Hotel receipts. A full report of every lie she had told me. Every time she said she was at a friend's house, or running errands, or visiting her sister, she wasn't. She was with them. I stared at the proof for a long time. It didn't feel real. I kept thinking about all the little things. The times she came home smiling for no reason. The way she started dressing up more, putting in extra effort when she said she was going to work but never seemed interested in dressing up for me anymore. The sudden distance between us. I had my answer. My entire marriage was a joke. I didn't confront her right away. I didn't yell or scream. I didn't break things or demand explanations. I was too numb for that. I felt like a man walking through the ruins of his own life, picking up the pieces of something he thought was solid, only to realize it had been crumbling for years. So I planned. I called a lawyer. I pulled my name off our joint credit cards. I emptied my half of the savings. The house? It was in my name before we got married. She wasn't going to get a dime from me. And then I waited. That night, I printed everything, the photos, the texts, the receipts, and put them in a folder. I sat on the couch, folder in hand, waiting for her to come home. When she walked in, she smiled at me like nothing had changed. Like she wasn't the woman in the pictures. Like she wasn't the woman whispering, "I love you," to another man. She froze when she saw the folder. "What's that?" she asked. I slid it across the table. "Open it." She hesitated. I saw the panic flash across her face, the kind of panic that only comes when someone knows they're caught. She picked it up with shaking hands, flipping through the pages. Her face strained of color. Her breath hitched. Her eyes darted across each page, scanning the evidence, searching for a way out. "I save it," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. "I know everything." Her lip trembled. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I never thought you'd find out." I let out a short laugh. A bitter, hollow sound. "That's why I hired a private investigator," she gasped. "You what? No! You can't do this to me!" I stood up. "I'm done, Sarah. I'm taking everything." She choked on a sob. "You can't. Please, just let me explain." "I don't need an explanation," I said. "I just need you out of my life." She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. I walked to the door, pausing just once to look back at her one last time. "Tell him I took everything." And then I walked out. I walked out that night, but the story didn't end there. I thought it would be simple. I thought I could just walk away, let her drown in her own mess, and start over. I was wrong. People like Sarah don't just let things go. They don't just accept the consequences of their actions. They fight. They manipulate. They claw at whatever they can to keep control. It started with the texts. First, they were apologies. "Please, let's talk. I made a mistake. I love you. I was stupid, but I never stopped loving you. Please, just hear me out. I know I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to understand." I ignored them. Every single one. I didn't owe her anything. Then, the messages changed. "You're not perfect either. You were never home. You never made me feel special. You think you're so innocent? Maybe if you paid more attention, I wouldn't have needed them. You had your faults too. This isn't just on me." She was trying to flip the script, make me the bad guy, rewrite the history of our marriage to fit her narrative. But I wasn't biting. Then she got desperate. One night my phone rang. It was Sarah's sister, Megan. "She's in the hospital," she said. Her voice was rushed, nervous. "She took something. Pills. You should come." For a moment I just stood there, phone pressed to my ear, heart pounding. Was this real? Or just another manipulation? I drove to the hospital. Not because I still loved her, but because I had to know if this was just another way to drag me back in. When I got there, she was sitting in a hospital bed, hooked up to N4. Her eyes were red, swollen. She looked small, fragile. Nothing like the woman I had spent 10 years with. Megan was in the corner, arms crossed, giving me a look I couldn't read. Sarah sniffled, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't mean to, I didn't know what else to do." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. She looked away. "I thought you'd at least care." I exhaled slowly, pressing my fingers to my temples. "You don't get to do this," I said finally. "You don't get to cheat, lie, destroy everything we built, and then pull this to make me feel guilty." Tears slid down her face. "I never wanted to hurt you. But you did," I said. "And now you have to live with that." She didn't say anything after that. I turned to Megan. She has family. She has friends. She has people who care about her. I'm not one of them anymore. And I walked out. For a while, things were quiet. No more texts. No more calls. I was starting to think she had finally accepted it was over. Then, Ethan's wife called me. I almost didn't pick up. I saw the name on my phone, Jessica, and my first instinct was to ignore it. I barely knew her. We had been at the same neighborhood gatherings, made polite small talk, but that was it. I answered. Her voice was raw, broken. "I just found out." I closed my eyes. I didn't have to ask what she meant. She let out a shaky breath. "I found your number in my husband's phone. In their messages. I had to talk to you. I don't know what to do." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? "Me too? I know how it feels. Welcome to the club?" Instead, I just listened. Jessica was unraveling. She told me about the weird gut feeling she ignored, the times Ethan came home smelling like a different perfume, the nights he claimed to be working late when he wasn't. She told me how she confronted him, and he denied everything until she shoved the evidence in his face. Then, she dropped something that made my blood run cold. "They planned to be together," she whispered. "Sarah and Ethan. They talked about it. About leaving us and running away together." For a second, I felt dizzy. "What?" "I saw the text," she said. "Sarah told him she was going to leave you, that they could finally be together. But Ethan, he never answered those ones. He never promised her anything." I sat down, gripping my phone tighter. Sarah had planned to leave me. Not just cheat, not just betray me, but leave me for him. She just never got the chance. And now that I had left her, she was alone. Ethan never intended to leave his wife. David was gone, probably moved on to another affair. And Sarah? She had nothing. And that's when I realized, this wasn't over. Jessica and I sat in silence on the phone for what felt like forever. My mind was racing, trying to process everything. Sarah had planned to leave me. She had been laying the groundwork behind my back, whispering promises to Ethan, building a fantasy where she and her lover would run off together and leave the wreckage of our marriages behind. But Ethan had never planned to follow through. Sarah had risked everything, our life, our home, our history, on a man who never even intended to leave his wife. I wasn't sure whether to feel angry or just disgusted. Jessica sniffled on the other end of the line. She keeps calling him. Non-stop. Begging him to meet her. That didn't surprise me. Sarah was desperate now. She had burned every bridge and was standing in the ashes, trying to find a way out. I think we should meet, Jessica said suddenly. I hesitated. What? I know it sounds crazy, she said, her voice shaking. But I need to talk to someone who actually understands. Someone who knows what this feels like. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her that this was something we both needed to get through on our own. But the truth was, I did understand. And no one else could. We met at a small coffee shop the next day. Jessica looked exactly how I felt, tired, drained, like she had been punched in the gut and hadn't figured out how to breathe again. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, staring at the cup like it held all the answers. How long have you known? She asked. A few weeks, I admitted. I hired a private investigator. She let out a weak laugh. I wish I had done that. Would have saved me a lot of humiliating nights pretending everything was fine. I didn't have a response to that. We were both victims of the same lie. Both of us had been played, betrayed, discarded like afterthoughts. Then, Jessica looked up at me. You know she's not going to let this go, right? I nodded. I had already figured that out. Sarah wasn't the kind of person to accept consequences. She wasn't going to just move on quietly. She was going to fight, to twist the truth, to make herself the victim. I had been preparing for that. What I hadn't expected was what Jessica said next. Ethan's scared of her. That caught me off guard. What? She leaned forward, lowering her voice. He's been avoiding her calls, ignoring her texts, but she won't stop. And when he finally did pick up, she threatened him. I blinked. Threatened him how? Jessica swallowed hard. She said she'd tell me everything if he didn't meet her. She was going to tell me before I found out myself. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. So Sarah had been trying to use her affair as leverage. When Ethan started pulling away, she tried to hold him hostage with the truth. Why would she do that? I muttered, more to myself than to her. Jessica hesitated. Because she's losing control. And when people like her lose control, they get dangerous. I didn't like the way that sounded. I should have seen it coming. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls. My phone had been on silent, but now it was vibrating against my nightstand, another call coming through. Sarah. I let it ring. Then, a text popped up. Pick up the phone or I'm coming over. I sat up, running a hand over my face. She was unraveling. A few seconds later, another message. You don't get to ignore me. I should have blocked her number. Should have shut it all down the moment I walked out. But some part of me had wanted to see how far she would go. The next knock at my door made my stomach drop. She was here. I got up, half dreading what I would see on the other side. When I opened the door, she was standing there, hair a mess, makeup smudged, looking nothing like the woman I had married. Her eyes were wild. You can't just pretend I don't exist, she snapped. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I'm not pretending. I just don't care. That set her off. She pushed past me, storming into my apartment before I could stop her. You ruined my life, she spat, spinning around to face me. You took everything from me. I let out a dry laugh. You did that yourself. She stepped closer, pointing a shaking finger at me. I loved you. No, I said coldly. You loved lying. You loved having options. You didn't love me. For a moment, I thought she might slap me. Instead, she started crying. You don't understand, she sobbed. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't respond. I just watched her. You think I wanted this? She continued. You think I wanted to hurt you? Yes. That shut her up. You didn't think about me once, I said, my voice steady. Not when you texted him. Not when you met up with him. Not when you made plans behind my back. She let out a shaky breath. I just wanted to feel something again. I shook my head. You're not special, Sarah. Everyone in a long-term relationship feels like that sometimes. But normal people don't destroy their families over it. She looked away, wiping at her face. I lost everything. Yeah, I said, opening the door. And now you have to live with it. She didn't move. What if I don't? A chill ran down my spine. What? She met my eyes. What if I can't live with it? I clenched my jaw. That's not my problem. She let out a bitter laugh. You're really done with me, huh? I didn't answer. We both knew the truth. She walked past me, pausing in the doorway. You'll regret this, she whispered. Then she was gone. I locked the door. And for the first time in weeks, I felt afraid. I should have known it wasn't over. The way Sarah looked at me before she left that night, it wasn't the look of someone who was going to quietly disappear. It was the look of someone who was planning something. I told myself I was done with her. That she could cry, scream, threaten, and manipulate all she wanted. I was out. But that didn't mean she was done with me. It happened at a local bar. I had gone out with a couple of friends, trying to distract myself, trying to remember what life felt like before my entire world fell apart. The place was packed, dim lights and loud music drowning out my thoughts. Then I saw her. Sarah. She was at the bar, a drink in hand, leaning in close to Ethan. I froze. My stomach twisted, my pulse spiking. Jessica was standing beside me. She had also come out, needing the same kind of escape. She followed my gaze and let out a dry laugh. Wow. She really is desperate, huh? Ethan looked uncomfortable. His body was tense, his eyes darting around like he didn't want to be seen with her. Sarah, on the other hand, looked like she was putting on a show. She was touching his arm, whispering in his ear, laughing way too loudly. Jessica clenched her jaw. Unbelievable. And then, Sarah spotted me. For a split second, her expression changed. A flicker of hesitation, uncertainty, maybe even regret. Then she smirked. I knew what she was doing. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to get angry, to yell, to cause a scene. She wanted to prove that she still had power over me. I turned to Jessica. Want another drink? She blinked. Then, realizing what I was doing, she smirked. Absolutely. We walked to the bar, completely ignoring Sarah. But she wasn't done. Wow, she said loudly, making sure I heard. That didn't take long, did it? I sighed, setting my drink down. Not tonight, Sarah. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, come on. You're really going to act like the victim? Like you weren't half checked out of our marriage already? Jessica scoffed. You cheated on him, Sarah. Multiple times. Sarah shrugged. Well, maybe if he had been a better husband. I turned to her, eyes cold. Don't. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her expression. Uncertainty. You don't get to rewrite history, I said. You don't get to turn this around on me. You made your choices, Sarah. You blew up our marriage. You lied, snuck around, betrayed me, and for what? I motioned toward Ethan, who looked like he wanted to disappear. For him? Ethan stiffened. Hey, shut up, Jessica snapped. Sarah rolled her eyes, but she wasn't as confident anymore. You thought he was going to leave his wife for you, I said, my voice quiet but sharp. You risked everything for him, and he never even wanted you. And now? He won't even look at you. Sarah's face turned red. Ethan downed his drink and stood up. I'm not doing this, he muttered, walking out. And just like that, Sarah was left standing there. Alone. She turned back to me, breathing hard. You think you're better than me? She hissed. You think you're winning? I didn't answer. Because I didn't need to. She stormed out after Ethan, but I knew he wasn't going to let her follow him. The moment they stepped outside, I could see them arguing. He shoved her away, shaking his head. She had no one left. After that night, things got quiet. Too quiet. No more texts. No more calls. It was like she had vanished. I should have been relieved, but something didn't sit right. Then, a week later, Megan, Sarah's sister, called me. You need to come over, she said. Now. Her voice was tight, urgent. I debated ignoring it. But against my better judgment, I got in my car and drove to the house I once called home. When I arrived, Sarah was on the porch. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Hair unkempt, dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't crying. She just looked empty. Megan stood beside her, arms crossed. She has something to say, she said. I leaned against my car, arms crossed. Go ahead, Sarah looked at me. For the first time in a long time, there was no anger, no arrogance, no manipulation in her expression. Just exhaustion. I lied, she said quietly. There was another one. I didn't react. I don't even know why I did it, she whispered. It wasn't about you. It was about me. I was chasing something that wasn't real, and I ruined everything for it. I stayed silent. She swallowed hard. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know why I asked you to come. I needed you to know. I nodded. Okay. That was all I said. She let out a shaky breath. You were a good husband. I didn't deserve you. Megan put a hand on her sister's shoulder. She's moving in with me for a while. Good, I said. Sarah looked down at the ground. I'm sorry. I studied her for a moment. Maybe she really was sorry. Maybe she wasn't. It didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for her. I wasn't here to help her heal or to comfort her. I was here because I needed to hear it for myself, that she finally understood. That was all I needed. I turned to go. Sarah called after me. Do you think I'll ever be happy again? I paused, then looked back at her. That's not my problem anymore. And I walked away. I moved out of the city. Started fresh. I still think about it sometimes. Not because I miss her. Not because I still feel the pain. But because it reminds me of who I am now. Stronger. Smarter. Someone who won't be fooled again. Sarah's life fell apart. I heard from mutual friends that she never really bounced back. She tried dating, but nothing lasted. She lost her job. She drifted. And Ethan? Jessica left him. Took the house, the car, and half of everything. Last I heard, he was living in some tiny apartment, drinking too much, regretting everything. Sometimes, people get exactly what they deserve. As for me? I found peace. And that's more than they'll ever have.